beyond the edge of reality lies a story of ultimate conquest, a story of war and friendship, a story of a love that can never be, and a hatred that always was. And now, the most anticipated epic adventure of the year will never come to a theater near you. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation.
Hello everyone, my name is Gerard Dragon Rider Khalil, but most of you know me as the Completionist right here on YouTube. In college, I wrote a big thesis paper called Embracing Your Dreams, the Final Fantasy of Storytelling. This paper dictated how one game changed the future of the industry by upping the ante to the point where films now have to compete with the cinematic storytelling of video games. My friend Alex and I worked very hard to bring this series to you, and we hope you guys at home enjoy it. So without further ado, here it is, Embracing Your Dreams, the Final Fantasy of Storytelling.
Final Fantasy VII. It launched over 15 years ago now, and fans still haven't stopped singing its praises. It tops many best game of all time lists, and love it or not, it's hard to argue that Final Fantasy VII isn't one of the most memorable parts of gaming history.
Why are you starting with number 7? What happened to all the ones before it? Isn't Final Fantasy VI one of your favorite games ever?
Well, yes, Greg, that's true, but Final Fantasy VII is so important to the history of the JRPG genre, it'd be crazy to start anywhere else. That's why I'm splitting it into 6 episodes. I want everyone out there to see just how rich and influential this game truly was. Not to mention, I'm a huge fan of it and everything it stands for.
So how's it gonna work, Shirako? How can we stretch one game across 6 episodes?
Easy. We'll just split up and expand on all the segments everyone's already used to seeing. On top of that, we'll walk through each disc in order, so that even if you've never played Final Fantasy VII, this month's episodes will be all you ever need to see. So this is our prologue video. Next week is Final Fantasy VII Disc 1 Part 1. The week after that is Disc 2 Part 2, and after that is Disc 3 Part 3. Then the following weeks, we will be reviewing the following games: Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII, and we'll also take a look at the animated film Final Fantasy VII Advent Children.
Awesome! But today let's focus on the historical context for the game, as well as where the game industry was upon the release of Final Fantasy VII.
Final Fantasy VII is the highest-selling Final Fantasy of all time, and is certainly the most successful JRPG ever to be released in North America. It's also an incredibly well-reviewed game, and because of this, it is considered to be one of the most influential RPGs of all time, and Square, the company who made it and is now known as Square Enix, is a legend in the genre.
But it's so different from Final Fantasy 1 through 6. Why did that work? What about all the fans of the other games?
Well, sure, that is sort of true, but if you really track the evolution of the series from 1 to 6, there really is a gradual shift in setting from classic high fantasy to something different, with more and more instances of steampunk influence being added until 6, where the Returners battle the Empire, and Terra shows a world that has moved past magic how to understand it again. Also, look at the character roster in Final Fantasy VI. It's huge! Think about that next time someone criticizes the high number of characters in Final Fantasy VII.
Oh yeah! I guess Final Fantasy VII was sort of a natural evolution for this series, but it still looks a lot different. And we can't forget that it was released for the PlayStation either. What happened between Square and Nintendo?
Actually, Final Fantasy VII was first conceived in 1994 as yet another Super Nintendo game. It was going to be set in modern-day New York City in 1999.
Whoa! What?
Yeah, right? Development eventually stopped on this version of this game because of how much of an effort was being put into Chrono Trigger. But some of the ideas that came out of development, like setting the game in New York City or Adia the Sorceress, were rescued in other Square games, like Parasite Eve and Final Fantasy VIII.
She existed before Sephiroth? That's crazy, but I'll take it. But now something else is bothering me. If Chrono Trigger kept Final Fantasy VII off the SNES, why didn't they just throw it onto the N64?
That was the original idea. Remember how the PlayStation originally spun out of Nintendo's abandoned attempts at making a disc-based console with 3D graphics?
Yeah, some crazy SNES PS1 Frankenstein thingy, right?
Exactly. That's what Square had in mind for Final Fantasy VII in 1995, when they made a tech demo involving Final Fantasy VI characters fighting in 3D. It was awesome, but when Nintendo announced that the N64 was going to be cartridge-based again, Square realized their only option was to end their relationship with Nintendo, and in early 1996, development began on Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation 1. Or, I guess they could have put it on 13 cartridges.
So then the better graphics allowed for more detailed character designs and more intricate environments, which inspired the higher level of technology present on Gaia?
That's right, Greg. Ka-chow! But originally, the plot of Final Fantasy VII was totally different. The first plan was to make it a detective story, where you'd be sort of a private eye character chasing a group of criminals who blew up Midgar. That all changed when Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi lost his mother. He decided he wanted to make a game about how when someone dies, it doesn't mean they're gone forever.
So that's where we get Aerith's story and the idea of the live stream, right? I know about Final Fantasy. I play fantasy. I fantasize a lot.
Uh-huh. The only thing left over from the detective concept is that the characters are constantly on the trail of Sephiroth. It didn't really feel like a hard-boiled noir story anymore, but the designers thought it was a good mechanic for moving the story along anyway, so they kept it. Disclaimer: in explaining the details of the game's story, events are listed in chronological order. This can sometimes ruin for players if the game might be a surprise reveal. We do this so that we can consider all of the characters' motivations as we analyze their journey through the game. If this sounds like it might be a problem for you, that's fine. Stop this video right here, play through the game, then come back another time. We'll be here waiting. Final Fantasy VII is a story-based game around the themes of loss and personal identity. These concepts are woven in the story of the game at many points, and because this is what I love most about the game, our plot summary will revolve around this thing.
Of course, we also know that the plot of this game is huge, and that every little bit deserves attention, so we've split up the story by which of the 3 game discs it appears on. Next week will be Disc 1, and then Disc 2 and 3 in the following weeks. Today, for the plot section of this giant completionist episode, we're going to cover everything that happens in the plot before the events of the game actually start. So without any further ado, Beardman...
Yeah, Greg?
Take it away!
Sit back, relax, and come with us on the analytical journey through Final Fantasy VII. In the ancient past, an alien race settles on the planet Gaia. They call themselves the Cetra, and they exist happily alongside the native human inhabitants, and both of them use the Lifestream.
The Lifestream is what Sakaguchi uses as an analogy for heaven and the afterlife. It's a source of pure magical energy that connects every living thing on Gaia. You come from it when you're born, and you return to it when you die. Also, people do Let's Plays on it.
Around 2,000 years before the game begins, Jenova, the calamity of the skies, arrives on the planet disguised as a Cetra. It wants Gaia for itself, and it begins exterminating the Cetra and corrupting the planet.
Gaia fights back by concentrating the livestream at the Great North Cave to create a bunch of giant creatures to help defeat Jenova. These are known as the Weapons. Much like Pacific Rim, these huge monsters are a reference to the old Japanese kaiju monster films.
Pacific Rim is incredible. If you haven't seen it yet, you really should. However, before the weapons can be used, the Cetra defeat Jenova and seal her in a rock. The weapons become inert and enter hibernation. The Cetra barely survive, and the few that are left just kind of disappear into the human population. This is our first huge example of loss and identity. Jenova exacts both upon the Cetra.
As time goes on, humans grow and civilization becomes centered around a huge industrial city called Midgar. Its name came from the Old Norse Midgard, which refers to the central realm, or middle world, of the 9 mythical planes. Just like its Norse counterpart, Midgar is surrounded by a giant desert. The Cetra are practically non-existent at this point and are now more commonly known as the Ancients.
A company called Shinra runs Midgar and uses its giant reactors to tap into the Lifestream, harvesting and selling it in a form called Mako. Everyone uses Mako for energy and for manufacturing materia, magical spheres containing spells. Shinra grows in power until it becomes a world shadow government. They know draining the Mako is hurting the planet, but they're so powerful they don't care.
A puppet mayor is appointed to run Midgar, and Shinra also runs the military and forms secret police. It's a terrible place to live for most most, and finally, the small amount of rich people that are there move off of the planet's surface to live up on a giant cluster of raised plates high above the city. In the last 50 years before Final Fantasy VII begins, it creates a social civil war with the rich literally above and the poor below.
At the height of their power, Shinra also creates Soldier, an elite unit of Mako-enhanced super soldiers, and the Turks, a secret group of covert assassins. One of these Turks is named Vincent Valentine. Trust me, you're going to want to remember that name since it becomes pretty important later on.
In Cosmo Canyon, another part of Gaia entirely, Nanaki is born to a small tribe of intelligent, four-legged lion folk who are having a war with a tribe called the Gi. Nanaki's father saves the tribe from the Gi, but Nanaki's mother is killed, and his father is turned to stone in the process. Loss and identity are evident here as well, because Nanaki never found out who his father was, and believes he was abandoned when the Gi came. The creatures of Nanaki's tribe live very long, and while their story is symbolically very similar to that of the ancients, they also share some actual connections with them.
Wait, who the heck is Nanaki?
Oh, I should have been more specific. You might know Nanaki by his other name, Project Red 13.
Gotcha. Around the same time, in a rural little coal mining town called Corel, a little boy named Barrett Wallace is born. What?
I'm just imagining Barrett as a little boy. What do you have instead of an arm back then? A super soaker? Also, Barrett Wallace sounds an awful lot like Bruce Willis. Alright, go on.
So about 30 years before the beginning of the game, a man named Professor Gas discovers Genova hibernating inside Mount Nibble. He convinces Shinra to help fund his research, believing Genova to be a living specimen of the ancient Cetra tribe. Professor Gas and another scientist named Hojo begin researching into creating humans with the same powers as the ancients in a basement laboratory, hidden under a mansion in a nearby town of Nibelheim. As a fun fact, Nibelheim roughly translates to cloud home in German, but it's also a reference to Niflheim, the Old Norse cradle of life. Both translations are perfect for what's going on here, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Hey Greg, tell us about Vincent.
As Gerard already said, at this point, Vincent Valentine is a Shinra Turk. He's assigned to keep an eye on Gast and Hojo during their research. And while he's there, he falls in love with Lucrezia, another one of the scientists at Nibelheim Mansion. Sadly, she's already in love with Hojo, and when she turns down Vincent's marriage proposal, he's devastated. However, Hojo is secretly just using Lucrezia, and once he impregnates her, he injects her womb with Genova cells. This completely ruins her body, and she's totally mutated by the time the baby is born. Vincent is obviously pretty upset, but when he tries to confront Hojo about it, Hojo captures him and subjects him to experiments. Lucrezia flees to live alone at Waterfall Cave, and when Vincent realizes everything that's happened, he seals himself in a coffin below Nibelheim Mansion for 30 years. Hojo escapes to Midgar with his son, Sephiroth. Sephiroth is Batman!
What we should be talking about is the crap Vincent just went through and how well it ties into our overarching themes of loss and identity. He loses his love and both of them are literally mutated, which severely alters their identities.
Man, poor guy has been through the ringer. And I'm not talking about that awful Sarah Michelle Gellar show. Anyways, what about that Gas dude?
He becomes horrified by what Hojo is up to and strikes out on his own to find out more about the ancients. He spends some time over in Cosmo Canyon, amongst other things, and eventually he meets Ifalna, one of the last real living Cetra on Gaia. They eventually fall in love and they have a child together. That's right, everyone. It's a little girl and her name is Aerith.
Isn't her name Eris? Aren't we Americans? Isn't this America? Have we lost ourselves?
Yes, Greg. Aerith is called Eris in the English version of the game, but that's only because that's how the Japanese pronounce the name with the TH spelling. That way, they avoid people saying her name as Erisu, which is definitely not it. The new English website for the PC game now refers to her as Aerith too, so we're going to call her that here. But it also should be noted that she's still referred to as Eris in the game itself. Anyway, Hojo finally tracks down Gast and his family. Gast is brutally murdered, but Aerith and her mother are captured and taken to Midgar by Shinra. More tragic loss, anyone? Around the same time in Nibelheim, a little girl named Tifa is born, and as she grows up, she becomes aware of another kid in the town. This one, a quiet little boy. He never really hung out with anyone, probably because he loses his father at a young age and is raised entirely by his single mother. His name, Greg? Greg, can you do a little fanfare for me, Greg? Huh? A little fanfare? A little fanfare? Cloud Strife. He's the main character of Final Fantasy VII and is often named as one of the best characters to ever be in a video game. His distinct spiky yellow hair and giant buster sword are almost as recognizable as Super Mario or Master Chief, but his backstory is so much darker and much more complex. But more on that later. Greg?
During Shinra's conquest of a town called Wutai, Ephalna and Aerith break out of Shinra HQ and find themselves on the run. They get as far as Sector 7 before Ephalna realizes she's going to die. She runs into a woman named Elmira Gainsborough, and because she's a nice person who just lost her husband in a war, Ephalna hands over Aerith for safekeeping. Elmira says yes because Aerith will help fill the hole left by her late husband. Loss, new identities! I think you might be onto something here, Gerard. As she grows up, Aerith begins to develop special abilities and periodically avoids being captured by the Turks. Back in conquered Wutai, a girl named Yuffie is born.
Meanwhile, Sephiroth's Jenova-enhanced abilities turn him into a powerful warrior, and he rises through the ranks of soldier, totally unaware of his crazy past. Word of his legendary status spreads to Nibelheim, where Tifa's mother had just died. Confused, she sets off to Mount Nibel to find her, and Cloud, inspired by Sephiroth to keep her safe, goes with her. Tifa gets hurt, and Cloud gets blamed, but now Cloud and Tifa become closer friends. Cloud aspires to join Soldier, and Tifa studies martial arts under Master Zangief.
Back in Midgar, Aerith begins dating a soldier operative from Gongaga named Zack. Cloud also tries to join Soldier, but fails and ends up a normal Shinra grunt instead. Still, when monsters begin attacking Shinra reactors in Mount Nibel, Sephiroth, Cloud, and Zack are all sent to investigate. Cloud's so embarrassed to be seen as a regular soldier that when Tifa is asked to take them up to the reactor, he keeps his identity a secret, once again playing into our theme of identity. Here, Sephiroth finds Jenova, and over the course of several frantic days in Nibelheim Mansion, rediscovers his past. He thinks he's a descendant of the ancients and begins to see humans as traitors to them who let them be destroyed.
In the aftermath of this discovery, Sephiroth goes into a rage. He murders Tifa's father and Cloud's mother, and raises Nibelheim before heading back to the reactor to try and release Jenova and reclaim the planet for her. Zack tries to stop him, but Sephiroth is too powerful. Sephiroth is about to free Jenova, but not before Cloud stabs him in the back. Just when Cloud thinks it's all over and tends to Tifa, Sephiroth recovers and stabs Cloud through the chest. Cloud, using all of his body weight, lifts Sephiroth with the blade still inside of him and sends him hurling into the exposed lifestream below. Sephiroth learns the history of the ancients as he tumbles through the lifestream, and he eventually becomes a deposit in the Great North Cave, where he plans on summoning a meteor in order to hurt the planet badly enough so that the lifestream can concentrate in the cave. He will absorb it, and he will become a god.
Weird plan, bro.
Assuming Sephiroth to be dead, Cloud, Zack, and the rest of the Nibelheim survivors are captured by Hojo and taken to the Nibelheim mansion, where they are subjected to Mako treatments in an attempt to create Sephiroth clones. Tifa is saved from this fate by Master Zangief, who takes her to Sector 7, where she starts a bar called Seventh Heaven in Midgar. When the cloning operation doesn't work, Hojo takes Jenova's body and leaves for Midgar. Hojo also captures and begins experimenting on Nanaki around this time.
There's just so much tragedy and loss. It's terrible, Gerard. It's just terrible.
Yeah, Greg, and the game hasn't even started yet. Also, let's not forget what's driving Sephiroth at the center of this whole game. His search for, you guessed it, an identity. Who are any of us anyway? Isn't that up to us to decide? Or does it depend on where we came from? That's the question Final Fantasy VII is constantly asking. But anyway, we gotta keep moving. Greg, tell us about Barrett.
So Barrett and his friend Dyne both still live in Corel. It seems like coal mining is sort of becoming obsolete, so Barrett is happy when Shinra arrives to build a Mako reactor and convinces Dyne to put aside his initial hesitance because it will keep everyone in town employed. One day, they go on a trip together, and when they get back to town, they find it under attack from Shinra, who has blamed recent sabotage attempts on the townsfolk. Dine is knocked off of a cliff in the fighting, and Barrett loses his arm while trying to save him. Corel is lost, so Barrett rescues Dine's daughter Marlene from the house where Dine's wife was killed, and replaces his arm with a gun. He heads to Midgar too. More loss!
Dine also replaces his arm with a gun, but goes crazy and stays in Corel, which eventually becomes a prison town for the brand new Gold Saucer Entertainment Complex that's been built above it. Dine rules over Corel, using fear to become a brutal prison boss. Barrett meets Tifa in Midgar, and because of their mutual hatred for Shinra, she allows him to use the basement of her bar as headquarters for Avalanche, Barrett's team of anti-Shinra activists and eco-terrorists. Back in Nibelheim, Zack and Cloud escape from the Shinra mansion, but Cloud's memory is damaged by all the Mako and Genova augmentations he's undergone. On their way to the mountains outside of Midgar, Zack tells Cloud his story about life in Soldier and what it was like to serve under the great Sephiroth.
Unfortunately, that's when they're discovered by Shinra, and Zack is killed before they can escape. Cloud is a little bit more functional by this time, and is able to escape with the aid of Zack's sword. He makes it all the way to Sector 7, where he's found by Tifa, and he is dressed in an old soldier uniform and clutching the sword. As he gets better, Cloud too begins to experience an identity crisis, mixing his memories with Zack's,
which leaves both the protagonist and the antagonist lost and alone at the beginning of the game. And now they've gone through so much tragedy. All the other characters are merely broken shells of themselves. The game can now begin, and we can play through their healing process in real time. Ladies and gentlemen, our episode of Disc 1 on Final Fantasy VII comes out Friday of next week.
Final Fantasy VI is my favorite Final Fantasy because I don't know, it was very like simple. It still had like mythical elements and stuff, but it was very like straightforward. It was like there's magic and there's technology and then there's a bad guy and then there's this good guy and then there's this girl and she's half magic, half person, so she's split between worlds, and it's like, oh wow, this is neat. And then all these different characters kind of had these different views on like what was going on. And
I have a theory that no, I'm not gonna say it.
Would you say a game theory? I know.
So I have a theory that the first Final Fantasy game that people play tends to be their favorite Final Fantasy game. So for me, my first Final Fantasy was Final Fantasy X, and then 7, and then 6. And so, as a result, Final Fantasy X is my favorite. And I know it gets a lot of hate, and I'll probably get a lot of hate in the comments for that. So one day maybe I'll have to defend it.
Final Fantasy VI is the greatest video game ever made. Hands down. There is no other game better than it, for it is the best.
My favorite Final Fantasy is 7. Overhyped, whatever. It's definitely 7. It was the Final Fantasy that got me into Final Fantasies. I had played the ones prior after playing 7. 7 was the one that pulled me in. I was captivated by the story, by the characters, just by the gameplay elements, like materia, stuff like that. It was fascinating to me, so it was definitely 7.
Hello, my name is Gerard Dragon Rider Khalil, but most of you on YouTube know me as the Completionist. Welcome back to week 2 of our in-depth review of the entire Final Fantasy VII franchise. Last week, we set the stage, and now we move on to Disc 1. While there was a lot of information, we're going to move forward with what we've explained in depth, keeping that information in mind. So, before we begin, be sure you checked out last week's prologue video, or else you might get a bit lost. We've also got a few great guests to come with us on this journey for the next 3 videos, so with that in mind, let's get started with Disc 1.
The game opens with a beautiful cutscene that introduces you to the ugly steampunk world of Midgar.
Hey, wait a second!
What?
Stop the video, run it back. Is that the poster for My Bloody Valentine's album Loveless?
I don't quite see what you're talking.
Yeah, it is, there it is! I'm an Easter egg finder, I'm the Easter Bunny. Seriously though, everyone check out Loveless. It's an incredible record, really sets the tone for the 90s.
Right. Anyway, the game begins with Cloud joining Barret and the rest of Avalanche on a mission to destroy Midgar's Mako Reactor number 1. This is probably one of the cooler ways to start a game, on a train with heist and battle music. The attack is successful and everyone escapes, but Cloud gets lost and accidentally runs into Aerith. They have a brief moment together, but then Shinra arrives to spoil the mood. He jumps into a passing train to escape, and luckily, the rest of Avalanche is waiting for him aboard. When they get back, Cloud wants to leave, but Tifa talks to him about their past for a while, and since that's what the game's about, he decides to stay. Cloud's so lost that he sets aside his pride just to feel like he belongs somewhere. It's like when it's your first day on a new job, and you try to participate in all the inside jokes, and everyone just ends up thinking you're weird.
The next day, Cloud, Tifa, and Barret attack the Sector 5 reactor. On the way out, they're stopped by the president of Shinra. During the ensuing fight, the bomb that Avalanche planted goes off, and Cloud is knocked off a bridge, falling down through the roof of a church in Sector 5. This is where Cloud and Aerith officially meet. This meeting is actually quite ironic later on when we get to Crisis Core, but we'll get to that eventually. Aerith constantly gets bothered by the Turks, and they show up at that precise moment. Aerith asks Cloud to be her bodyguard. Cloud agrees on the condition that they go on a date.
This is probably the most out-of-character thing that Cloud does, but it's also important to note how special Cloud thinks Aerith is. So, I'll allow it. Cloud helps her escape to Elmira's house. Cloud explains to Elmira and Aerith that he must try and find his friends Tifa and Barret. At Elmira's request, Cloud tries to leave in the middle of the evening, but Aerith heads him off. They give each other purpose, which is the first step towards forging an identity, and because of that, they decide to stick together. It's like finding out someone else likes the same nerdy stuff that you do. I had the same reaction when I found out Egoraptor liked Final Fantasy VII.
This game sucks. What's the worst thing about it? Everything. Best game ever. More like best lame ever. Oh!
Cloud and Aerith casually make their way to a park and spend some time together as they try to think of what to do. Suddenly, Cloud sees Tifa riding in the back of a carriage headed to Don Corneo's brothel. Don Corneo is one sick freak of a man that lives for himself, but he's a puppet for Shinra. Together, Aerith comes up with the idea to dress Cloud as a woman in order to rescue Tifa from the brothel, but not before Corneo reveals Shinra's insane plan to blow up the plate above Sector 7 while framing Avalanche. We're also briefly treated to a scene where Reeve, head of urban development for Shinra, opposes the plan, but that won't make any sense till later on. Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith head to the Sector 7 pillar, where Barret and Avalanche are in a firefight with Shinra soldiers. Tifa has Aerith go to 7th Heaven to save Marlene, while Tifa and Cloud go up to help Barret. Everyone but Barret is dead. The Turks also reveal they've kidnapped Aerith during this whole firefight. Aerith mentions that Marlene is safe. They fight the Turks at the top of the tower, but it's too late. The pillar is going to blow up. Tifa, Barret, and Cloud grab a construction ball and swing down.
Horrible! So much death and loss at the beginning of this game. I guess that's part of the whole theme thing, but wow! Does it ever get better?
Slowly but surely, Greg. Cloud, Barret, and Tifa head back to Aerith's house and find that Marlene is safe. But now, it's time to save Aerith. They climb the rugged walls of the slums and reach the top of the plate to Shinra HQ in order to save her. Now this is actually cool because you have the option of taking the stairs, or you can go guns a-blazing through the lobby up to the higher floors. While there, they rescue Nanaki, who now goes by Red 13. They discover that Aerith is being used to help the Shinra reveal the secrets of the ancient Cetra Promised Land. The group gets captured by the Turks, but shortly after, Sephiroth arrives. He plans to keep the Promised Land for himself and murders almost everyone in the building.
They did a lot of good, I don't want to say character development, but at least like getting you acquainted with like how cool Sephiroth is, like with the Midgar Zalem and like the big sword, and it's like, oh, who did this? Is it Sephiroth?
With the death of Shinra's president, his son Rufus is now in charge.
Wait, I thought that Sephiroth was dead.
Yes and no. More on that later.
All right, but I don't get it. Sephiroth is locked away in the North Crater in the Mako deposit. How can he be doing this? Also, take a look at Genova's prison. It's been busted wide open. What the hell is going on?
We'll get to it, I promise. Anyway, in the ensuing chaos, Cloud and company are able to escape. They fight their way out and escape Midgar on an unfinished roadway and regroup in the nearby village of Kalm, where Cloud tells everyone the story of Nibelheim, substituting himself for Zack. Now remember, at this point, everyone thinks that Cloud's the hero, with no mention of Zack at all. Tifa agrees with this because she doesn't quite remember much of the event. The Nibelheim incident will be a reoccurring conversation if you haven't figured it out already, so be prepared to hear about it a lot.
We've had other characters like experience loss, but this is the first time that the main character has said like, this was the huge period of loss for me, and this is what changed this changed his life, because he was, he was a soldier, and then this made him what he was. He took on like someone else's personality, he took on Zack's personality, and he was like, I'm gonna almost carry this mantle, and this was the change. The game wouldn't have happened without the Nibelheim incident,
And it's creepy and unsettling and weird, and then he like runs through the fire, which I'd seen like a million times before I'd actually played it. So I was like, oh, here's this scene, everybody loves it. Why isn't his hair catching on fire?
Thematically, the fact that before the game even starts, we are given a backstory of every character losing something. So Tifa loses her hometown, and Cloud loses his memory, and Sephiroth loses his life, and I guess Zack even loses his life. But since we already have this theme of loss going even into the game, it's interesting that the themes of the game were sort of created after the game existed.
One of the wildest things about it, and you don't really realize it until after the fact, but up till that point, you had never really seen Sephiroth. You'd heard about him, Cloud had talked about him, you'd seen kind of hints of him killing the Shinra president and things like that, but that's the moment where you first see him, and it's this grand entrance of like, look at the decimation that I've caused.
Now this is the first time in the game that everyone has a clear purpose. Between two evils, we have Sephiroth and Shinra. Based on what we saw, Sephiroth is definitely the worst of the two. The only one who seems to be along just for the ride is Red 13, as he states he only wants to be around until we reach Cosmo Canyon. They decide to chase Sephiroth and follow him to Junon Harbor. This is a moment where you can pick up the side character Yuffie. She's actually a bit of a hidden character. All you have to do is battle randomly in the forest near Junon Harbor. But be forewarned, do not check your inventory or look away when you find her, as Yuffie will steal from you depending on your responses.
Cloud periodically struggles with his memories, but he tends to shake it off. The group ends up together at the new president of Shinra's coronation ceremony. Rumor has it Sephiroth is aboard the boat that is sending off the new president. The group disguises themselves as workmen on the ship to find Sephiroth. Unluckily, they have to fight a piece of Genova. They barely escape and follow Sephiroth to North Corel, where the survivors from Barrett's hometown now live. The group follows whispers of black materia and cloak-tattooed figures to the nearby Golden Saucer, where they run into the owner, Dio, and Kate Sith, a silly gray cat who rides a stuffed Moogle. Barrett becomes emotional about returning home and storms off. Kate Sith forces himself to join the party awkwardly, and it's weird that you just have to accept it. The group goes off to have fun playing a lot of the games and seeing the events in the Golden Saucer, but something tragic happens at the battle arena. It's discovered that a man with a gun for an arm has been killing people. The crew of the Golden Saucer assume it's Barrett and company, so they're all arrested and sent to Corel Prison.
Down in Corel Prison, they're reunited with Barrett, and it's revealed that his old friend Dine, who remember also has a gun for an arm, is actually the murderer. Barrett fights Dine and tells him Marlene is still alive. Dine gets upset at what he has become and kills himself. To clear their name, Cloud cons his way into the Chocobo races and wins everyone's freedom, as well as a little buggy to help them get around. They make their way to Cosmo Canyon, where Red 13 tells his whole story and introduces everyone to Bugenhagen, a scientist he considers to be his grandfather. Bugenhagen tells everyone about the livestream and lets Aerith know that she is the last Cetra alive. Everyone is upset, lost, and at odds with their own individual pasts. So, Bugenhagen sends them all to the Cave of Gi, where Red 13 learns the truth about his father and resolves to help save the world. The group, with their newfound purpose, heads to Nibelheim.
Nibelheim? Oh no! That's where all the devastation happened, where the story began! How can our heroes possibly handle such a... Oh, it's exactly the same.
I didn't really see what the appeal of him was. You know, I'm like, oh, here's this guy, he's kind of strange. This whole time I expected him to be kind of like the smooth operator who's like strategically taking down everyone. To me, I was much more invested in the like anti-Shinra campaign and taking down this big corporation that was ruling the world, this and that. But that incident of burning down the town and just utterly decimating everyone who lived there, that was the moment where, and seeing Sephiroth like walk through the flames in the cutscene, like that was the moment that I saw what made this guy such a big deal.
The locations were really stood out to me, like that like really low wide angle of like the stairs leading up to Genova. Like I remember that really well, and it just felt intense. It was cool. It was probably the music. The music's really good in that game.
Shivers, but like excitement shivers, you know? Like he was so cool. Even though he'd done something, so you were like 12, I was 12 when I was playing this game, and I was like, this guy is just, how am I supposed to fight this guy? He is ridiculous. And I remember I had a save game and I kept reloading the save game just to watch the clip again and again and again. Because like the graphics weren't that great in Final Fantasy VII, but this particular cinematic was just, it was there for all to see. And it was just like, yeah, just walks through the flames. I remember it perfectly.
Immediately, One Winged Angel comes to mind. That's, I think, what everyone would say. I would say confused and perhaps used.
Strangely, no one in Nibelheim acknowledges that anything ever happened there. However, Sephiroth is in the mansion, and the black cloaked figures on the outside of town, they're muttering the word reunion. Sephiroth tells Cloud he has no right to join him for the reunion, and Cloud begins to realize that Jenova might not be an ancient after all. The reason why Sephiroth says this is because Jenova cells were injected into Cloud when he was held captive, but Cloud was considered a failure. There is another missable character here, our friend Vincent Valentine, the former Turk. He's still sleeping in the Shinra mansion. Getting him opens up many more aspects of the story, and after our prologue video, who wouldn't want Vincent in our party? After collecting Vincent, the group heads up through Mount Nibble to Rocket Town.
Rocket Town? What a hilarious name! Hey, there's a giant rocket in our town. What do we call it? Let's call it Rocket Town. Done. Let's go to lunch. You want sandwiches? Ice cream sandwiches. It's ice cream lunch.
They meet the foul-mouthed, hot-headed Sid, a pilot with dreams of going to space. Shinra shows up demanding that they take Sid's only plane, the tiny Bronco. Shinra already confiscated the Highwind, which was Sid's airship, and this is just another thing they need in order to follow Sephiroth and our crew. They all climb in the tiny Bronco together and escape. Sid forcefully goes with his ship, and the Shinra shoots it down. The tiny Bronco then becomes our car boat. Angry at Shinra, Sid joins the gang. He tells you how he used to work for the now abandoned Shinra space program and that Rufus was chasing Sephiroth to the Temple of the Ancients to get the Black Materia. Sid's mean spirit comes from the loss of his dream. He was going to become the first person who went into space. The Shinra-funded space program guaranteed his dream to be a reality, but on the day of launch, his assistant Shara got stuck in one of the compartments. If Sid had launched the rocket, he would have killed her, so he pulled the plug on the launch, which in turn cost Shinra money, and they backed out of the program. With our brand new water car boat, we have the ability to explore, and the new area we can explore aside from our main destination is Wutai, Yuffie's hometown. As we make our way to Wutai, Yuffie's secret plan to steal all of our materia comes into fruition. Our new goal is to get all of our materia back, while avoiding the Turks and the rest of the Shinra soldiers. We head to Wutai and go on a wild goose chase until Yuffie gets kidnapped by Don Corneo, our sleazy villain from the brothel Midgar. Now this is actually really cool because we get to team up with the Turks to take down Don Corneo, as Corneo has taken one of their own. Shortly afterward, Yuffie returns all of our materia and we can move back to our main quest. But a surprisingly endearing fact we learn from this quest is actually how Yuffie became a thief to steal materia. It's because of the conflict that once existed in Wutai. Wutai was at war with Shinra for quite some time, and Shinra won, expunging the spirit of Wutai. Yuffie and her family's spirit was in turn also crushed. Another example of loss not only for Yuffie, but for the entirety of Wutai. After hearing that the temple's keystone was sold to Dio over at the Golden Saucer, they head over there to get it from him. Dio happily hands it over after a round in the battle arena, but the gondola vehicle is busted for the night. They decide to spend the night at the inn. Aerith finally cashes in on the date she owes Cloud, but since he's being so quiet, Cloud reminds Aerith of Zack. This is actually a fun moment because depending on how you interact with Barret, Tifa, and Aerith throughout the game, you can actually end up on a date with either of the three. Regardless of which date you go on, Cait Sith turns out to be a remote-controlled Shinra spy, yet another instance of incorrect identity, and he steals the keystone for Rufus. Cait Sith shows his true colors by showing the group that he has Marlene hostage, and that they must take him along with them, or else.
What a jerk!
Oh, trust me, his story's even weirder than you think. They go to the Temple of the Ancients where they find Sephiroth, and he explains his plan on becoming a god to them. After getting the info he needs, Sephiroth disappears. The group realizes that the only way to keep the black materia magic out of Sephiroth's hands is to shrink the temple, but it will crush everyone still inside. Cait Sith decides to sacrifice his giant stuffed body to do it, redeeming himself. Sephiroth once again appears and uses Cloud's Genova cells to control him physically and breaks him into two different versions of himself, one of which hands over the black materia. Now this is actually awesome to play because no matter what you do, you cannot stop yourself from giving the black materia to Sephiroth. Sephiroth leaves, Cloud passes out, and the rest of the group shows up with another model of Cait Sith in tow.
So Cait Sith is just invincible? What is he? What sort of witchcraft created him?
While Cloud is knocked out, he has a dream where Aerith tells him she's going to the City of Ancients to handle Sephiroth without them. He wakes up inside of an inn in Gongaga. Aerith is gone, and he tells everyone what he saw. Things are looking pretty good, there might be a chance for redemption. They fight through the sleeping forest and find their way to the City of the Ancients, where Aerith is kneeling in prayer by a standing pool of water. As Cloud approaches the altar, Sephiroth begins toying with Cloud like a puppet. He pulls out his Buster Sword and he's about to stab Aerith. This is so frightening. In this moment, we battle with the eternal struggle and question of, is Cloud actually going to kill Aerith? But then, Sephiroth drops out of nowhere, and in one of the most famous surprise twists in the history of gaming, he kills Aerith where she stands. Aerith was given a white materia when she was a young girl, and throughout the journey, she references that it has no magical powers. Upon her death, the materia falls out of her hair and skips across the water gently, sinking to the bottom.
The impetus, the thing that you as the player feel, is Aerith's death at the end of Disc 1. Like, that's the big thing that everyone notes as their personal moment of loss as a player. And I think that is what stuck with more people than anything else in the game.
Why didn't you use Phoenix Down? I'm out. Yo, I win the interview.
You know, I had never really played a game where one of the main characters or one of the main party members just dies in the middle of the game. It was so shocking to me. I know that was kind of a trope of Final Fantasy games before it, but Final Fantasy X, that doesn't happen, which was the only one that I had played before. And so I didn't know that this was kind of something that Final Fantasy games were kind of relatively known for or whatever. And I think most people who came into the series at 7 or later found this out for the first time in that moment.
Oh, Aerith died. It was so sad. I didn't even care. I was actually really frustrated with her because right before that, you fight the wall, I think, right? And they made you use her. And I was like, F this shit. I don't even use Aerith. And then she died, and then I was like, I don't care. And then I like Tifa better anyway, so I don't know. It wasn't a big deal to me.
Shock. This was the first time I'd ever seen someone die in a computer game and not come back to life. You know, this was I mean, you not like, obviously you see people die, but in the sense that this was a character that you invested in and you leveled up and you had her in your party and you became attached to that character and then it was ripped from you. This was the first time that happened to me, and I think for a lot of people, it was the first time it happened to them too. So it was a shock. I think part of you knew she was gonna die, but I don't think anyone expected, or I didn't expect, that she would be gone for good, like gone.
You know, we're untouchable. You know, we grew up with like Link and Mario and stuff, and those guys don't die. I mean, unless you suck, but you know, in RPGs, especially Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, like, you know, I'm trying to think what other, Earthbound and stuff, like people don't die. It's a video game. Like, you're the heroes. You're gonna win the day. But here it is, this like, just out of nowhere, this murder scene. And it lets you know that you're not safe. Like, anyone can go at any time.
Needless to say, Cloud is devastated, and as Sephiroth casually leaves for the Promised Land, the group is faced with yet another piece of Jenova.
Wait a second. I think I just figured this out. We're not actually hunting Sephiroth at all.
Oh, awesome, yes! I think Greg gets it exactly!
Every time we catch up with Sephiroth, what happens? We fight a piece of Jenova. Jenova for many years disguised herself as a Cetra, right? That means that Jenova is a shapeshifter. Sephiroth didn't actually kill Aerith. Jenova shapeshifted into Sephiroth. The Sephiroth who is in the Mako deposit in the North Crater is the real one, but because he was the only one born with Jenova cells, he has the ability to control Jenova. So it was Sephiroth's will that killed Aerith, but not physically Sephiroth.
Which correlates into our theme of loss and identity! Oh, snap! Just when everything was looking up, Cloud loses what's most important to him. Sephiroth has him doubting everything he thinks and knows about himself, and he feels like he's just a pawn in some larger game he doesn't really understand. End of Disc 1. So why spend all this time on Final Fantasy VII? For a fan of the game, the short answer might be, oh, because it's freaking Final Fantasy VII, and sometimes that might even be enough. But for me, the answer is a bit different. I want to talk about this extensively because the themes of loss and personal identity are so universal not only to the characters in this game, but also to all of us as humans. We've all wondered where we fit in the world. We've all lost somebody or something we care about. That's why Aerith's death is special. It's not because you lose a party member. Plenty of video game characters die. Aerith is special because in such a big game, it comes at the end of the first disc. It comes early on because of Sakaguchi's original intention. Aerith dies because as you play the game, it shows you how to move on.
Hello everyone, my name is Gerard Dragon Rider Khalil, but most of you at home know me as the Completionist, and welcome back to part 3 of Final Fantasy VII Month. This analytical experiment has been going very well so far, and now it's time to start with our analysis of Disc 2. Today will be a little bit different as we not only further our journey of the plot, but we also explore the presentation and the gameplay of the game as well. Our guest from last week will also be making more appearances throughout this video as well, so sit back, relax, and let's continue our journey into Disc 2.
Oh man, Gerard, I don't know if I'm ready. This is like 10 times worse than watching Atreyu's horse sink into the swamp. Can we take a break?
Actually, Greg, that doesn't sound like a bad idea.
It doesn't?
Not at all. In a game that's so cinematic, what better time to take a step back and look at why it's so effective than right after the most emotional moment in the game.
I could probably remember every single pre-rendered background in that game. Just because like, it was always like a weird camera angle, and it was always like this weird setting, and it didn't feel like towns felt. in like Super Nintendo Final Fantasies or any other RPGs at the time, because they were like very structured, but like it was just like this drawn world, like a designer made the world.
There were many other RPGs that looked beautiful but didn't have a good story. And the other popular games at the time, the really big games that were out then, weren't story games. They were games that were shooters, racing games, fighting games, but there wasn't anything RPG that was that good.
I have to admit, like, that was when I have to analyze like what was my least favorite part of the game. That was probably it. Was just the jarring kind of blockiness of the graphics. I wasn't used to kind of the PlayStation's version of three-dimensional graphics. And so coming at it from the PS2, where everything was like super polished and just like that next step up, kind of taking that graphical downgrade and seeing like, you know, blocky Cloud walking around with his like huge like black gloved arms.
Being in whatever grade I was in at the time, I fully am aware that that captured the attention of a lot of people. It wasn't just gamers or nerds. It was everyone saw it on TV and saw it in magazines. It was like, this is something we've never seen. This is the next generation. That's what we expected for every generation of video game consoles. And so far I've been horribly let down.
I mean, a lot of JRPGs that were coming out around that time were still similar to SNES games, right? In graphics-wise, in the way they were played, story-wise, they were kind of... Final Fantasy VII was shoved into the next gen. And it was the first JRPG that really hit that next gen after, like, you know, the SNES era. It was the first one that really captivated people on the PlayStation. And I don't know why it stands out, but it had that wow factor. It was good.
Final Fantasy VII's genre-defining cinematic feel was a huge undertaking both financially and artistically, requiring the work of about 120 people and a budget of over $30 million.
$30 million? In the early 90s? This game cost more to make than Mrs. Doubtfire. Who was working on this game? Steve Jobs and Bill Gates combined? Still Jates!
Not quite, but Final Fantasy VII is a living world, and it takes a lot of effort to make that happen. I mean, just look at the game. Every last element is timeless. The character design in this game was the Final Fantasy debut of lead character designer Tetsuya Nomura, who was handpicked by Hironobu Sakaguchi himself when franchise regular Yoshitaka Amano was unable to make the time commitment. Nomura's character designs are also amazing because when he started working on them, the story hadn't even been written yet, so the details he created in his head as he designed everybody actually influenced the course of the story. For example, Red 13 only looks the way he does because Nomura wanted a four-legged party member in the game, and his name just comes from the fact that he thought a color and a number together sounded cool.
That's crazy! Even 15 years ago, the mainstream video game industry was so much more punk rock than it is now. Maybe that's where Final Fantasy VII's hard edge comes from. Gaia's a tough place to live in. It reminds me of Star Wars or something where the world feels really lived in, and the line between high fantasy and science fiction is blurred. It's like Final Fantasy VI, but even more so. And the fact that the characters were 3D models made them so much more expressive than the static sprites and text boxes of games past.
It was because of the design team's desire to create something that felt real and dramatic that the art style of the game evolved this way. Early on, there was talk of doing more detailed pixel art on 3D backgrounds like in Xenogears, but the fact that the characters could move all their body parts made it possible for them to act a little more. I don't think people realize what a huge step forward this was for RPGs as a whole. It changed everything. It breathed life into a game traditionally based around menus.
I love that push and pull between art and technology. Final Fantasy VII's such a great example of it. Take the FMV cutscenes. The new technology of CDs made it possible to have these awesome clips highlight and add dynamics to the more important parts of the plot. But since they looked so good, the design team turned towards pre-rendered 3D backgrounds instead of the pixel art grids of games past, so that the discrepancy between the two styles wasn't too jarring. And it really worked. In fact, the only thing they weren't satisfied with was the different style of the character models used in and out of battle. That's why the weird, blocky versions don't exist from Final Fantasy VIII and on.
That's also why Nobuo Uematsu's always excellent compositions take a step forward this time around. Many of the songs are longer and more complex because of the increased storage capacity of the disc, and One Winged Angel, perhaps the most famous piece of music in the game, is the first in the series to use recorded vocals. The game orchestrates itself just like a film would, telling you what to feel, when to feel, and how to feel.
It leaves the game feeling bigger. Gaia feels like a living world, and that the story we see is just one of many being played out all over it. The game feels so rich and so full that sometimes you get paranoid that you're missing something, even after talking to everyone and seeing everything the game has to offer.
Final Fantasy VII is like a novel told in video game form, and by the time it was released, Squaresoft was good enough at making games that the last few in the series already felt like intricate and beautiful clockwork. Final Fantasy VII is a standing piece of art that you can truly interact with while using all your senses. You can come back to it at different times in your life and take something new away from it each time. It plays just as good as it looks.
I think like one of the other things this game did was like pull in a lot of, like if you got tired of the storyline, there was a lot you could do. Like chocobo breeding and chocobo racing. I must have spent hundreds of hours breeding and racing chocobos, and the gold saucer, and there's loads of these, you can just explore this expansive world and find like side quests and, you know, like hidden items and caves. There was so much to do besides the main storyline as well.
In terms of like becoming mature and like having a more, I don't want to say sophisticated, but like at least a more specific view of video games, I still think that game had it right.
My least favorite thing about Final Fantasy VII, without a doubt, has to be one of the things that Final Fantasy used to do back in the day, which was you had to grind magic. And so in order to get all your characters prepared so you could have them in whatever situation you needed them, you had to go back and just grind and grind and grind and get them new spells, and get them to learn new things. And since then they've changed that, but they've added other grindy things, which I'd rather grind for magic, knowing that I'm improving my character, than like cards or chocobo babies.
That was a banner year. If not like one of the pinnacle years of gaming. You have the N64 entering into like this huge heyday all of a sudden with GoldenEye and Mario Kart and Diddy Kong Racing, you know, and just you have Ocarina of Time on the way. And then you have all these awesome like Mega Man Legends and you know, looking at this list, like you have Diablo and stuff. And then as like the crowning achievement almost, the one that supersedes all these phenomenal games, Star Fox 64, another one, you know, Gran Turismo, all these franchises that live on to this day and were, you know, the best of their franchise. You have Final Fantasy VII as the thing that got past all these other amazing gold games and just rose even higher.
The gameplay of Final Fantasy VII is so universally loved because it strikes the perfect balance between the traditional ATV-based combat of the SNES days and a more modern and gameable leveling system. Tack on a few nuggets of genre-defining innovation, and boom, we got a new RPG. So first, let's talk about materia for a second. Rather than gaining new skills and abilities simply by gaining experience, the materia system creates a much more open-ended and customizable system by attributing your party's learnable moves to small Mako-based powered orbs that grow in power the more you use them. They can be combined together in various ways. At the end of each battle, you gain experience points which increase your level, and AP points which increase the level of each individual materia equipped. This is how you evolve your party. For example, if you have a fire materia, with the base spell being fire, you can level it up, and now you can cast fire and fire too. And through hard work and grinding, you can master the materia, which will unlock the highest amount of damage from that materia. And when you master the materia, you also get another one for free. And there's all different kinds of materia. Red materia is summon based, in which you can summon monsters, gods, goddesses alike to fight on your behalf. For those of you new to Final Fantasy, summons are a common trope in these games. Green materia is usually your offensive magic. Blue materia is your support/all materia, where you can cast spells on multiple enemies if the materia are tied together. Purple is general battle support, materia that affects your party's stats. And yellow is battle command materia, where the materia adds another command to your battle actions. This gets crazy big and crazy cool when you start getting things like Forecut, Mug, or my favorite, Mimic.
Wait, but if materia comes from Mako, and Mako is the distilled version of the livestream, and if Gaia's currently in trouble because they're depleting the livestream, then, oh god, Gerard, doesn't that mean that—
Precisely, Greg. The reason we still talk about Final Fantasy VII's gameplay today is that not only was it fun, but elements of it also forced the player to interact with the game's core themes, whether they were totally conscious of it or not. For example, materia is based on taking from the planet, but it's also how your characters are able to grow. It's a conflict of interest, and it perfectly exemplifies why experiencing loss isn't always as simple as it seems. Though that still doesn't explain why maxing out the enemy skill materia is so damn annoying.
Same goes for limit breaks. Sure, there were awesome new attacks you got to unleash when you piled up enough damage, and it was really cool to be able to hold on to them until the next big boss fight, but they also sort of help exemplify each of the characters' identifying traits. There's 4 different tiers of limit breaks, and you unlock 2 limit breaks per tier. To unlock the second limit break, you need to use the first limit break a certain number of times. To unlock a new tier of limit breaks, you need to kill a certain number of enemies with that character. It's very possible early on to get all your characters' limit breaks. Plus, the whole system is based around each character getting more and more angry the more they're attacked. So when the limit break is finally unleashed, what we get to see is an expression of that specific character's innermost turmoil. That's why Cloud channels anger through Zack's old sword, why Aerith amplifies her compassion for others, why Red 13 howls into the night, and so on. It's an expression of their damaged identity. And what about when Tifa and Cid take over the party? How much more literal of an identity crisis can you have?
It's also great to just travel around and explore the world. Whether you're in the buggy, a chocobo, the submarine, the tiny bronco, the Highwind, or even just on foot, there's always something new and neat to do. It makes the world feel bigger, the story feel bigger, and in turn the game feels bigger. Final Fantasy VII's gameplay creates an entire world. It's a feeling that many gamers at the time were probably feeling for the first time, and it still hasn't stopped being wonderful. Gameplay considered, Final Fantasy VII becomes a truly complete story told from every conceivable angle.
Man, that was great. Okay, Shirako, I'm ready to get back to the plot now.
Alright, Greg, but brace yourself. Cloud's uphill climb is about to begin. Loss will soon make way for coping. After Aerith's death, the party follows the Sephiroth clones and Jenova north to the Icicle Inn, where they discover the details of Aerith's parents. Unfortunately, they also run into some Turks who are mad at Cloud for critically injuring their boss when he shrank the Temple of the Ancients. But, hilariously enough, Cloud just snowboards away off a mountain and onto the Great Glacier.
That is one of the coolest things that has ever happened in a video game. Forget walking away from explosions in slow motion. How about snowboarding away from all conflict and onto a nearby glacier? Choice.
Anyway, they make their way through the mountains until they arrive at the Northern Crater, the real Sephiroth's resting place, where the reunion is well underway. The black hooded figures are revealed to be pieces of Jenova, and Sephiroth is controlling and absorbing all of them via Jenova. He is building his power until he can cast Meteor and destroy the entire world. All Sephiroth needs? The black materia. Cloud and company arrive and challenge Jenova/Sephiroth to a fight. They defeat them and grab the black materia. Cloud, Tifa, and one other party member decide to go down and finish off Sephiroth once and for all, but Cloud does not trust himself with the black materia, so he leaves it with one party member of your choice and the rest of the party. While there, Sephiroth shows them a vision revealing that Cloud isn't who he thinks he is. Sephiroth calls into question whether or not Cloud's just been Jenova's pawn this whole time because of Hojo's treatments. Now this is where Cloud hits his peak of identity. He's being made a fool no matter what he does or says. However, the truth is in plain sight. Zack was the true hero that accompanied Sephiroth to Nibelheim, not Cloud.
Suddenly, Rufus, Hojo, and Scarlet, the head of Shinra's weapons development branch, all appear at the cave in the airship Highwind, having discovered the location of the ancient Cetra Kaiju weapons inside. Within all of this confrontation, Sephiroth controls Cloud like a puppet again and convinces Cloud out of his mind with self-doubt to summon the party member you gave the materia to give it to Cloud. Cloud then flies above to where Sephiroth is sealed and places the black materia into the Mako deposit.
This is when we're starting to learn that Cloud isn't what Cloud thinks he is. We're starting to learn with Cloud that he is not who he thinks he is. And this is when everything starts to come undone and you realize that this guy who you have been playing as the hero is real messed up. He is a messed up dude and he doesn't know who he is or what he is. And I don't know what I thought was gonna happen.
In this exchange, all hell breaks loose. Sephiroth, black materia in hand, immediately casts Meteor. The weapons awaken, everybody leaves the crater on the Highwind, and Sephiroth puts a barrier around the crater so no one else can get in. Cloud goes tumbling into the live stream and... Hey, I thought you said it was an uphill battle from here. All I'm seeing is more loss and the worst identity crisis so far. There's no battle, it's just getting worse.
Maybe so, but the first step to healing is admitting that you have a problem. And boy oh boy, did Cloud ever do that. Tifa and Barret wake up a week later in custody at Junon, and the world has gone crazy. There's a meteor in the sky, and Rufus has decided to execute them as scapegoats for the coming apocalypse. Sid and the others hijack the Highwind and save Barret, but just as Tifa is about to be killed, a giant weapon shows up and attacks the city. Shinra's Mako cannon destroys the monster, but Tifa escapes to the Highwind and they fly out in the mass confusion. Cloud is nowhere to be found, so the party heads off to try and find him, with Tifa in the lead. Here, Final Fantasy VII gives us yet another storytelling device that only a video game can convey. By placing the player in control of Tifa, the game gives them an active way to experience a lack of faith in Cloud as a leader. By forcing them to look through Tifa's eyes for a while, the game is asking them if they're sure they still want to be Cloud. And now that you have control of the Highwind, it's time to scope out areas you've never been to before, and there's not too many.
The team eventually finds Cloud sick with Mako poisoning in a town called Medial, and to throw an even larger wrench into the identity issues machine, now Tifa elects to stay behind with Cloud as he heals. The group as a whole has a hard time understanding if Cloud is actually Cloud or if he's just another Sephiroth clone. The crew then has to nominate someone to lead them, and the person they choose is Sid. When he gets back on the airship, Ketchi, sorry we pronounced it wrong last week, reveals Shinra's plan to use a special type of materia called huge materia as a devastating weapon. They decide they must find all 4 pieces and stop them at all costs.
So let's just do a mini recap thus far, alright? We got the real Sephiroth, now free from his Mako deposit prison, and he summoned Meteor. Shinra is trying to destroy Meteor while trying to stop the group from stopping the Meteor, Shinra and Sephiroth. Cloud and Tifa are no longer with us, Aerith is dead, and to top it all off, there are huge monsters designed to destroy the planet, and they're trying to kill everyone. Damn! Back in his element, Sid takes over as captain of the Highwind and begins the hunt for the huge materia. While he may not be the hero, he is a great leader, and now that everyone knows exactly what they have to do to save the day, optimism returns, and the healing process now begins. The first huge materia is located in North Corel, and when they hijack the train that's holding it, they have to save it from crashing into the city. It may not seem like much more than a cool action sequence at first, but looking at it another way, it's also the first step in Barret's healing process, and now that he's a hero, he doesn't have to feel so ashamed showing his face in his hometown anymore. This theme continues in the quest for the second huge materia at the place called Fort Condor. Now, a lot of you voiced your concern that we skipped the Battle of Fort Condor in the main plot of the first disc, as you can visit Fort Condor between our journey from Kalm to Junon Harbor. The reality is, it's not that important to the current plight of our heroes in Disc 1, but in Disc 2, it's a whole new ballgame.
Shinra runs a reactor at Fort Condor, but when the party arrives, they find the company in an armed conflict with the indigenous folk over a sacred condor nesting at the top of the fort. Shinra perceives it as a threat to their operations and wants it destroyed, but the inhabitants won't allow it. It's a perfect metaphor for the way Gaia is finally starting to shake off Shinra's evil influence. When Avalanche and company arrives, they're able to defeat the Shinra troops and grab the huge materia, but more importantly to our overarching theme, even though the sacred condor dies in the battle, a brand new baby condor hatches in the nest, which symbolizes new hope and rebirth. How sweet. I love that the game feels super positive now. Maybe Sakaguchi's idea of moving on is actually taking hold.
Speaking of which, at this point, Sid suggests the party go back and check on Cloud in Mideel. But once they get there, they're immediately attacked by a weapon monster known as the Ultimate Weapon. Your party is able to defeat it for now, but not before it is able to critically damage the town, causing the livestream to explode from the ground into the air. In this motion, the livestream takes Tifa and Cloud with a large portion of the village. Tifa and Cloud go on a journey through Cloud's subconscious, where she's able to help him realize what actually happened in Nibelheim between him, Sephiroth, and Zack. This is probably the moment in the game where it is crystal clear that our theme of identity and loss hits at its hardest. We walk with Tifa as she goes on her journey to find her real friend since they were kids. Her eyes immediately open as to who he is. She cradles Cloud in these moments, giving him the assurance that it's time for him to come home to his family and save the world. For Cloud, Zack is the hero, but Tifa makes it clear that Cloud has always been her hero, and he's been saving Tifa for his entire life. For the first time since the game has begun, Cloud Strife knows exactly who he is, and he immediately snaps out of his coma. Cloud Strife, the real Cloud Strife, has finally joined our party. All together again with new resolve and acceptance for their past traumas, Avalanche heads to Junon Harbor for the third huge materia.
Yay! Cloud's himself again. It's amazing how much confidence you can gain from admitting your problems to yourself and actually trying to work on them. It's like the final step of the 5 stages of grief we talked about in the Majora's Mask episode. Go kick some fanny, Cloud!
Cloud almost got dragged along by the people he was with. And I feel like if this had been a game where it was just Cloud, we would have lost him very early on. So there was the element of like his friends around him helped him through, but also the element of like he experienced a lot of very human emotions, right, that we don't normally see in like a superhero. Like Link, for example, in Zelda. Like, he wouldn't feel guilt. Like, we get this really strong feeling of guilt from Cloud, and he feels responsible for the death of Aeris. And we get this feeling of like revenge. We get this feeling of like hopelessness.
The best thing about Final Fantasy VII is that they didn't ever play it safe. I think it's really funny that if you go to the Golden Saucer, you can have the option to go on a date with Barrett. If you are in Midgar early in the game, you rescue the girls dressed as a girl, right? It doesn't pull punches. It's very silly and fun, and it's okay with that.
Because it was kind of like this dark world. Like, there wasn't really much happiness in that world, right? Like, everybody was kind of sad. And, like, a bunch of, like, terrible shit was going on all the time. So, like, it gave this sense of, like, loneliness and, like, helplessness. And then, like, the feeling of, like, corporation strength was really big.
If there's one thing that Final Fantasy really excels in, it's relationships, which is fundamental to telling a good story, right? Like, that is the essence of drama, of comedy, is relationships between people, or in this case, characters. And, you know, Cloud's relationship with Tifa, Cloud's relationship with Aerith, Cloud's relationship with Barrett, like, and how, you know, Aerith and Tifa kind of having like a girl fight, you know, there's so many interesting relationships in that game that's truly where Final Fantasy VII excels.
With Cloud at the helm, the party heads underwater to take the third huge materia from the Turks in Junon Harbor before heading back to Rocket Town on the trail of the fourth and final huge materia. Shinra is planning to launch the huge materia into space using Cid's old rocket as a last-ditch effort to destroy the meteor. Now, this is where Cid finally gets his own redemption. If they're going to launch the rocket, he's going to be a part of it in some form or another. They get into the cockpit to try and abort the launch, but it's too late, and Cid decides to try and finally fulfill his dream of going into space, even if it's not exactly the way that he imagined. Shira is also on board, and when the oxygen tank that she was inspecting all those years ago finally explodes, it pins Cid to the ground. He realizes there was really no way that he would have made it out the first time he tried. It gives him his closure. He's finally able to forgive Shira. They get away with the huge materia in an escape pod,
But in this moment, Sid experiences one last moment of loss as he sees his dream in the form of a rocket ship run straight into the meteor and explode. And with all of Sephiroth's magical powers, the meteor rebuilds itself. Confused and defeated, the party now heads over to Cosmo Canyon to see if Bugenhagen has any leads on saving the world.
Luckily, he does. He stores the huge materia in his lab, by the way, remember this for next week's episode, and takes them to the Forgotten Capital, where he discovers that the seemingly useless white materia Aerith carried with her all those years back actually contained Holy, and that she summoned it shortly before her death. They find out it actually has the power to stop the meteor, but that Sephiroth's power is holding it back. That leaves them with only one option: to destroy Sephiroth.
Well, not so fast. As you start to leave, Ketchi reveals that
Are you serious? How many times is Ketchi gonna tell you something super serious just after you do something awesome?
Right? Anyways, he reveals that he's being controlled by Reeve back at Shinra headquarters. In case you don't remember, Reeve was the one who opposed the idea of crushing Sector 7 with the plate. Reeve heard that they're moving the cannon from Junon to Midgar to use its Mako reserves to fire a blast at Sephiroth at the North Crater. How's that for weird identity crisis? Why would this guy choose a magical demonic cat that rides a Moogle as his avatar? Cloud and friends fly to Midgar to stop the cannon, but when they get there, they are met by the diamond weapon. They're able to stagger it, but unluckily for them, it just gives Shinra enough time to fire and destroy both the weapon and Sephiroth's shield. Still, before it dies, the diamond weapon is able to destroy much of Midgar, and Rufus is killed in his office.
However, before the High One's able to get to the crater, Ketchi pipes up again and tells everyone that Hojo is powering up the cannon for one last shot at the crater. He also says that it'll probably explode and kill everyone in Midgar if it's fired again. They make their way through the Turks and one of Scarlet's monster creations before finding, oh god! Is that Hojo?
Yeah, that's Hojo. He finally reveals that he's Sephiroth's father and that this whole messed up situation is the direct result of his experiments. He wants to use the cannon to send Sephiroth one last boost of energy, and when Cloud tries to stop him, we discover Hojo has been injecting himself with Genova cells and that we've got a pretty gnarly fight ahead of us. The party defeats all of his weird mutant forms. It's like everyone transforms in this game. It's like it's almost the theme of the game! Oh, snap! In these last moments, Cloud gives the party an ultimatum. Everyone can spend their final moments on Gaia with their family and friends, and just forget about the whole fight with Sephiroth. Or they can join with Cloud and Tifa as they plan their attack against Sephiroth, Genova, and everything else that stands in their way at the North Crater. This is a wonderful moment where Cloud and Tifa realize that the only family they have is each other, and they spend their last free day on Gaia in the High Wind together. The next day, everyone shows up to let Cloud and Tifa know that they're seeing this through till the end. Everyone is healing, if not completely happy, and all that lies ahead is the final showdown with Sephiroth. End of Disc 2. So if all that's left is the final showdown, where does that leave our thematic arcs of loss and identity? Happily, we leave them today on a positive note. As we saw today, it seems that the ultimate message of Final Fantasy VII is that with good friends to help you, no matter what you've lost or how confused you may be, you'll always find your way home. But is that too easy? Are we focusing too much on the surface meaning? How much deeper can we get? The answer is plenty, and you can find out exactly how much in next week's finale, where we talk about the game as a whole, all the fun and crazy stuff there is to do on the side, including endgame discussions of completionist quests, and get you ready for delving into the rest of the games in the series. The game thus far has taught us how to overcome loss and reinvent hope within one another and ourselves. So I invite you all to come back next week and join us as we close the final chapter in our journey through Final Fantasy VII.
Hello everyone, my name is Gerard Dragon Rider Khalil, but most of you at home know me as the Completionist right here on YouTube. And welcome back to part 4 of Final Fantasy VII month. Now we are nearing the end of our in-depth look at the main game. Today, we will spend a good amount of time focusing on the completionist aspects of this game, including the Master Materia, top-tier weapons, limit breaks, and other side quests such as fighting the big weapons. Our guests join us one last time to help us wrap up the plot of Final Fantasy VII. So, without further ado, let's dive into Disc 3.
Last week, we saw Sephiroth's biological father, the mad scientist Hojo, use the cannon to blow open the path to Sephiroth's final resting place, the Northern Crater. All that's left is the final showdown. Wait, why are we doing an entire episode if all we gotta do is go fight Sephiroth?
Easy. One word, closure. Closure for the characters, closure for us as gamers, and closure is the last thing you need on the journey through loss, and discovering who you really are. Disc 3 is the closure disc, and as the completionist, I have my own special closure I need from this game as well. So, let's put the creator on hold for just a second and delve into some side quests.
You know, Final Fantasy VII, like that was the defining RPG of 1997. That was the defining RPG of probably that decade. You know, of the 90s. That's saying a lot, so maybe I shouldn't say that. But one of them by far in terms of storytelling, in terms of gameplay, in terms of telling this epic, I mean, quite literally, it was an epic. It wasn't just a video game. It was this piece of art, you know, that aspired to so much more than the sum of its parts.
I guess that's true, right? Like games now, like it feels like, you know, there's a lot more effort going into it, but in a different way. Like it's all about production as opposed to like this world building shit, right? Like I don't feel like there are games that are as robust as those old RPGs were, where like there's all kinds of shit happening. Like the only games I can think of that compare to that kind of feeling are like Fallout or Skyrim.
It was definitely a fun conclusion, but I think that there's a lot of things that when you beat the game, if you didn't do all the side quests, you didn't go back and experience everything that the game had to offer. Like if you didn't do all of Vincent's storyline, you missed a lot that was in the game. And the thing is, you didn't need it in order to complete the game and complete the story. Because really, it feels like, even though you have a giant cast of characters, it feels like after Aerith's death, it really is, at least cinematic-wise, just about Tifa and Cloud. And that's what they focus on the entire last part of the game.
For me, that was just like, I would pick up the game and I'd be like, you know, I'm tired of doing the storyline. What can I do today? Oh, let's go bleed some chocobos, or let's race some chocobos, or let's go to this place, or you know, we'll go to the Gold Saucer and take part in the fighting arena. You know, there was just so much on offer besides the storyline, and the storyline itself was just immense. So the fact that they offered you that much extra was a real good thing for me.
Part of the reason Final Fantasy VII is so wonderful is that it fleshes out the world of Gaia with plenty of extra stuff to try that has nothing to do with the main plot. More specifically, we have the Golden Saucer, the weapon fights, all the weapons and final limit breaks, breeding the Gold Chocobo, and the Master Materias.
Wowee, we got a lot to cover, but we're only gonna cover Cloud's limit break, ultimate weapon, and a few of the materia. In the interest of time for this portion, we want to show you all that we think is relevant to our overarching theme. So let's start off with a little closure for Yuffie and Vincent. Back in Disc 1, when she stole the party's materia, we learned that Yuffie has an identity crisis of her own. Yuffie's family rules Wutai Village, and after the Wutai Shinra War, even though a reactor was never built, Yuffie's father, Godo, gave in to Shinra, and Wutai was reduced to a tourist attraction, a shell of its former glory. It leaves Yuffie feeling torn. Wutai's loss of spirit makes her feel ashamed, like her people are cowards. Yuffie doesn't know whether she should do what she thinks is right and fight Shinra tooth and nail, or follow the complacent path of her people, loss and identity in its own special way, all rolled into one.
Upon a return visit to Wutai, Yuffie is able to take on the trial in the pagoda in the back of the village. You fight just as Yuffie through 4 bosses until you reach the top, where you discover your last opponent is none other than Godo. The fight is brutal, and in the end, both Yuffie and her father are left exhausted on the floor. It leaves them feeling a sense of mutual respect, and afterwards, Godo explains that fighting just to show they're still mighty makes the Wutai clan no better than the Shinra. What's really good for the village is finding the balance between strength and determination, and that will put a stop to the constant fighting. It brings Yuffie's arc to a close, and you also get the Leviathan materia and Yuffie's final limit break all creation. So, it all works out, closure found. Now, on to Vincent.
Once you get the submarine in the cave where you found the Key of the Ancients, you can keep exploring along the western wall until you find a passage leading outside to another chamber behind a waterfall. If you have Vincent in your party, an event will trigger once you're inside. Vincent recognizes a voice he hears in the cave as belonging to his lost love, Lucrezia. Vincent and Lucrezia are forced to face their past and confront the fact that she is Sephiroth's mother.
She spends all of her time in the cave, agonizing over the rumors of his death, and being conflicted over whether or not giving him a mother's love would have changed anything. Lucrezia asks Vincent if the rumors of his death are true, and instead of telling her that her son might be responsible for, I don't know, the end of the world, Vincent tells her Sephiroth died. Now at peace, Lucrezia's Genova-ridded spirit disappears. Giving Lucrezia closure gives Vincent closure and helps him starting his own healing process. Now we'll find out more about this in a few weeks with the Dirge of Cerberus, but for now, enjoy Vincent's ultimate weapon and his final limit break. When it comes to limit breaks, you can simply obtain them all by doing a few specific quests, but as we said earlier, we're only going to discuss one limit break in depth, and that is Cloud's Omni Slash. In order to get it, you need to survive several battles in the Golden Saucer's battle arena. Also, important to know, you cannot teach people their final limit break until they've learned the rest. Cloud's limit break Omni Slash shows the exact desperation of when one man comes to a certain point, when he must fight back with everything he's got. So just for you guys, here's Omni Slash in its beautiful execution. On the surface, chocobo breeding is simple to understand. Take 2 chocobos, give them the right nut or greens, and get a better one. Fight battles until that one matures, and then breed that with another one. Give them the right item, and so on and so forth until you finally get the gold chocobo. However, once you really try to do it, you'll find that it goes much, much deeper than this. You also have to get them up to a proper class by racing them at the Golden Saucer. Only chocobos with an S ranking will allow you to breed super efficiently, and the only way to rank up your chocobos is by winning races. On top of that, the only way to win races is by feeding your chocobos to boost their stats. So there's a lot to do here, but in the end, if you stay determined and use a good strategy, the golden chocobo will be yours in no time. Now there's different colored chocobos that do different things. The green chocobo can travel to different terrain, including mountains. The blue one can only do shallow waters. The black chocobo can do a combination of both, but the gold chocobo can go anywhere on the map, even places the Highwind cannot land.
Once you get your golden chocobo, you can go anywhere in the game, and if you're like us, your first stop is almost certainly going to be Round Island, a tiny little area in the northeastern corner of the map where you get the game's most powerful and notoriously long-winded summon, Knights of the Round. This summon is the most iconic and most difficult to get, and when you cast it, be prepared to wait up to a minute while all the Knights of the Round Table do their thing.
Almost all of the summon materia is a mandatory get for the story, but there are a few you can miss. None of them are permanently missable, which is nice, but you also have to do some side questing and revisiting to get them all. Getting them all isn't important for anything specific in terms of bonuses, but all of them will be important in order to get Master Materia sets.
Wait, Master Materia?
Yeah. The huge materia that we collected in Disc 2 and hand over to Bugenhagen now acts as a materia condenser. It will assimilate all of one type of materia into a master version. So for example, if you have all of one green set of magic materia mastered, it gets turned into one green master magic materia. Getting them grants you the ability to use every move associated with that colored materia.
So if you want to give everyone a set of master materia, you have to master all of the materia again for each character? That's nuts!
Pretty much. Except for the set you get from the guy in Calm.
Watch Guy in Calm.
He's in the rightmost house and he trades you for the stuff relating to the leftover sets or weapons you haven't defeated as a part of the story. There are several hard optional bosses added to the American release of the game, and they grant some pretty remarkable rewards. Let's go after the Emerald Weapon first. If you fight the emerald weapon, you'll notice that a timer appears on screen. You need to get the underwater materia, which removes the time limit by turning an enemy into the key item, the guidebook, and give it to that same traveler in Calm. It's a rough battle, and upon beating the emerald weapon, you'll get the earth harp, which you can then trade to get an extra set of master materia. Up next, we've got the ultimate weapon. The ultimate weapon is the dragon-type weapon that destroyed Mediel during the whole Cloud Tifa crisis, and I think it's about time we got revenge, shall we? The weird thing about the weapon is that you can chase it in the high wind, defeat it, and then follow it to a new section and fight it again. Eventually, we defeat the weapon at Cosmo Canyon, and we are awarded Cloud's best weapon in the game, the ultimate weapon. Quick side note, when the weapon explodes, it leaves a huge crevice in the floor, allowing you to have access to the ancient Forgotten Forest. This side quest is weird, and you must trek through several different parts with animals and insects to get across. The ultimate payout is Cloud's Apocalypse weapon, which triples AP growth. Also, Apocalypse is a reoccurring sword in almost all Final Fantasy games. After that, it's time for the Ruby weapon.
Wait, Ruby weapon? Emerald weapon? Where's the Sapphire weapon? Is this Pokemon? Where am I? Come on. I'll be here all night.
Not exactly, Greg. The Ruby weapon by far is the hardest fight in the game, and incidentally, the strategy required to beat him just so happens to tie perfectly into the theme we've been talking about this entire time, overcoming loss. The weapon is only vulnerable when one of your characters is alive, and it has the ability to remove party members from the battle. Plus, it's constantly doing this, confusing you and making it hard for you to function normally. Using the mechanics of the game, it forces you to move past loss and all the bad stuff it brings with it in order to win. And it's only through using the Hades summon, i.e. Mastery of Death, that you're able to slow him down at all. Once you do that, it's time for W summon Knights of the Round and Mimic Chain until you're done. It's a great fight, and when you win, you get the Desert Rose, which is good to trade for an extra golden chocobo. It's subpar to the one you got from breeding, but whatever, that's the weapons. It's time to discuss the missing piece. We've talked about what the game means and how to play the game, but now let's take a look at what it feels like to play it.
It was a pretty big part of my childhood. Like, I was a part of like web rings and like Emily Gregg was like a big influence on me. She was like a huge Final Fantasy VII fan artist, and she did like comics and stuff. And I'd like print out her comics and like bring them to school and read them, and I would like try to emulate her style. And it was like because I was into Final Fantasy VII.
I'm what you would call a Final Fantasy nerd. So I had played Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy V, Final Fantasy, I think it was 4, which was 2 at the time, and I got a bootleg version of 5. That's how hardcore I was, because I don't know if people are aware of this. When I was a wee lad, 3 was 6, 4 was 2, 5 didn't exist, and 1, I don't remember what 1 was. Maybe it was 1 originally, I don't remember. And so I was so into them that I went and got all the different ones that are around. I was a big RPG nerd, and 7 was just, look how beautiful it looks! I need this next-gen console.
And there's a lot of nostalgia with Final Fantasy VII. You grew up on this game, and when you're 12 and you're impressionable, this game, like, it helps mold you. You become that attached to it, and the storyline is great. And it's like any good storyline you see as a kid, you would remember. And a lot of people that are saying this is overrated are looking back in time from the point now where, like, this game changed, like, JRPGs and changed a lot of games, and a lot of today's games are based on some of these changes. So they're used to the changes. So to them, this is nothing special, this game. It's overhyped. But to people who were there and who played it, it was game changing. It was the one. It was great.
One of my favorite parts about it is the fact that like it was able to balance all that seriousness that we've been talking about with moments of levity and comedy and character building and relationships. And it goes back to the relationships, and that's my other favorite part actually is the dating scene. And whether you're going on it with Barrett, Tifa, or Aerith, like the fact that you could, depending on your actions, you could end up with any of those 3, and each one resulted in like a really interesting, deep character moment. That was either funny, like the Barrett thing's hilarious, right? Here's the 2 guys hanging out in the tram together, watching the fireworks, and it's like it's fantastic. It's comedy gold because it's these 2 bros just hanging out. Then you have Tifa, this like lifelong friendship and kind of this like will they won't they thing going on, which is great. And then Aerith as kind of like the go-to kind of heartthrob, the sob story, this poor girl forming that relationship. And the fact that each of those encounters was so incredibly different and so incredibly rewarding in its own way really speaks to the strength of the relationship building in that script.
When people describe what it's like to play Final Fantasy VII, it's commonly done with rose-colored glasses. Or perhaps more accurately, they're merely describing what it was like to play Final Fantasy VII. 17 years on, the game is really starting to show its age, and while I wouldn't even be close to the first person to say it, while largely excellent, the experience has never been perfect.
Archaic gameplay elements and technological shortcomings are abound in Final Fantasy VII. While we'll take some time to mention them here, we'd also like to explain that we are reasonable people, and we do realize that when reviewing a 17-year-old game, there's a huge amount of hindsight, which didn't exist back then, that colors our opinion of the game now. On the flip side, it is currently 2014, and ignoring the past 17 years of gaming when formulating our review seems a little silly.
So let's just get right down to it. Certain elements of gameplay, specifically those tied to progression, are severely flawed. It is very common for this game to demand obscene amounts of time out of you for combat options that are necessary to fully completing the game, or optional and usually very meager rewards. For example, mastering a set of materia for everyone takes far too long. Doing it once is fine, and getting the extra set from the Emerald Weapon is acceptable, but the amount of time it takes to reach the point where it's even conceivable that you might defeat the weapons is outrageous. The Ruby Weapon alone is worse than every other enemy in the game put together. It took me 77 hours to legitimately level up all the characters to 99 with 3 full sets of Master Materia, counting the set I got from the Emerald Weapon. I can't even imagine doing that 6 more times. It would unquestionably stop being fun. And did you know that if you hit level 99, the game doubles in difficulty in the last battle? What better way to reward you for your hard work than making it feel like it doesn't matter? I know the intent was there, but the execution was untested. And even though they fixed this to some extent in later games, it does not change the fact that it didn't work here.
Another rough patch was the enemy skill materia. There are 24 skills to get from enemies, 2 of which are permanently missable, and 6 of which require the manipulation materia. Nowhere in the game does it give you any indication of how to get these skills, and it would be almost impossible to get every single one without a guide.
Also, as revolutionary as the graphics were at the time, the graphics in Final Fantasy VII really do not hold up well, especially the blocky ones used for the overworld. I realized that it was a weird transitional holdover from the cute chibi-style sprites of the SNES days, but it was a step that could have easily been skipped and later was in Final Fantasies 8 and 9 on the same console. The biggest situation Final Fantasy VII has going against it is that for newcomers to the RPG genre, the story can come off as convoluted. However, that being said, the avid Final Fantasy fan or even someone who just enjoys cinematic storytelling will continue to be invested in the story and the characters the entire length of the game. I love this game from the bottom of my heart, and my pure interest in the game made me understand it so well. But I can understand that some people would have a real hard time really enjoying the material. At the end of the day, for me, a game needs to have flaws to appropriately appreciate everything else with it. A perfect game can sometimes be a bit too boring, which is why I do not believe in a ranking system from 1 to 10. That being said, it all boils down to a matter of taste. Anyways, let's get back on track. For now, we have our version of the story to get through, and the final chapter is just about to begin.
Yes, I did beat it, and I think there are a lot of emotions going up to the ending, right? One was, sweet, I finally get to fight Sephiroth, like this is epic. Then it was, wow, he turned into this angel thing, like, wow, that's weird. Like it was cool, don't get me wrong, but it was like, did not see that one coming. And then there was always, for me, you know, I'm the theorist guy, I like realism. I'm always like looking at realism, and so I see him do his meteor, right, is the final summon, and it's like this 15-minute long like epic animation of this rock just hurtling through space, destroying every planet. You know, he uses it multiple times during the battle, and so I'm like, I don't know about this one? And you're like, oh, clearly I could survive that. So I always got a kick out of that, like just personally.
So I did beat Final Fantasy VII, and I don't know, I guess I didn't really, it was more like I triumphed over the game. I don't know, the story wasn't like, it was like, oh, live stream and stuff. It was very, I use the word a lot, but it definitely encompasses Final Fantasy VII. It was like super esoteric. It was like, oh, return to the live stream, and now and it deflected meteor, and like, was it all for naught? Was the live stream just gonna save the day anyway? And
I vividly remember the final battle. I think that's something everyone remembers. The first time you're playing a game and all of a sudden, like, a choir comes in. You're like, what is even happening right now? And there's an ability where, like, the world explodes. That's one of his moves. It was insane. It was a lot of fun.
I did beat 7, and what happens is you get towards the end of the game and you feel like you have to wrap everything up, and you kind of put the crater on hold. And I think this is what a lot of people did, and you go around and you finish everything, and then you get into the crater and it is crazy, like balls to the walls crazy, and you're like, I forgot that this is what this game is like. And it was, for me, it was that feeling. And then like the final showdown between Cloud and Sephiroth, it was just so fitting. It was really good. Even the showdown with Genova, like it just resolves everything perfectly in the end.
Suddenly, all that's left of our story lies in the northern crater. Emotions are high, and as the final 3 party members are chosen to head down to the ultimate confrontation, all bravado is lost. There's nothing anyone can say that will feel more important compared to what lies ahead.
However, before they fight Sephiroth, there's the matter of Genova, who finally shows its true form as it attacks the party at the top of the crater. Funnily enough, after all that time it spent posing as Sephiroth, fighting it this last time is much less exciting.
Either way, with Genova gone for good, everyone meets up once again at the bottom of the crater, where they finally, for the first time in the game, see Sephiroth for what he truly is. His real power is staggering, and indeed, everyone begins to feel that the fight is already over before it's even begun. But suddenly, the power of Holy makes itself known, and Aerith's prayer gives everyone that last little boost of encouragement they need to press on. Ultimately, the loss of Aerith and the party's ability to move past it is what gives them the strength to fight a seemingly undefeatable evil. Before the final battle, everyone resolves to fight together, and once the fight starts, there's no turning back.
Boy, for a group of lonely, messed up head cases, they sure did find a lot of strength in the power of friendship.
One winged angel blares from your television speakers. The fight is hard and complicated. Hell, Sephiroth has his own version of Knights of the Round, where we have to watch an abridged version of the meteor destroying our solar system and eventually hurt us really badly. But after many limit breaks and Knights of the Round and 2 separate Bizarro and Safer forms, Sephiroth is finally defeated. Your role as a player is over, but the story still needs some closure. It's time for the final showdown between Cloud and Sephiroth, one-on-one. No magic, no special powers, just man-to-man battling.
It all boils down to this like super quiet moment at the end where there is no party. It's just you and this monster that has just like tormented you the entire game. And you get to use the most powerful, insane attack ever in Omni Slash, and you just go to town on this guy.
I mean, it has to be, right? Because this game starts off giving you the impression that this is a guy that is untouchable. He is above everything. He is way above Cloud. And then the final chapter of this game is showing the growth. Like, now Cloud knows who he is, and he knows what he has to do, and he's here, and he's in front of this guy who was untouchable, but suddenly he's not untouchable.
It's this immensely cathartic moment, right? Because at that point you hate this guy so much, and you just want to see him. And here I am thinking like, oh man, I don't have any healing powers. Like, what am I going to do to fight this guy? But then it's like, oh, use Omni Slash, great. But it was awesome because that was the first. I didn't earn that limit break in the game, so that was my first time seeing it, and it was like, whoa, look at this power that I have.
And when he's finally gone, all that's left is good. Cloud smiles as he gets to see Aerith one last time before he's yanked back to reality by Tifa as the crater collapses around him. The party escapes the crater, but they're not out of the woods yet. Meteor is still coming, and it doesn't look like Holy's going to be enough to stop it. Things seem hopeless. Holy was summoned too late, and now its power is only adding to the destruction. But then, up from underneath the planet itself, comes the tendrils of the Lifestream. Aerith's power combines with that of the planet to save everyone. The path to rebirth is through death, and our themes of loss and identity wrap up around themselves for this ambiguous and yet somehow fitting end. As the credits roll, we can sit back and reflect on the journey we just endured. But before we go, we see Red 13 with two younglings, many years later, showing us what has happened to the planet. Midgar is filled with plant life and covered in green. We know deep down inside that the planet will be reborn.
Like in modern games, they try to like perfectly emulate what the artist had, and then it doesn't work out right because it's a game. But Final Fantasy VII wasn't really about the game aspect of it. It was kind of about like the world aspect of it, and that felt really cool. And it kind of changed my perspective on like what a game could be, which is weird because after I had played it and finished it, and there was like this big like, oh, Final Fantasy VII is one of the best games ever, I had like this like hipstery kind of like, oh, well, no, it's not, because it's all bad and there's all these problems and blah blah blah. And there was like this time in my life where I like really hated on Final Fantasy VII, and I think for a while I actually believed it, but like it did like affect me as a kid. It was like a pretty big deal growing up to me.
It's a very, very serious game that has moments of joy, and you're like, I can see that they enjoyed making this. It's a lot of fun.
I mean, my impression of what happened was the reactors that were sucking out the live stream, obviously this left like, Midgar was almost just a drainage pipe, right, a drain. And there was all these holes because they were draining out the live stream, and it was just the easiest place for the live stream to come up out of and get rid of all of that bad, all of that. So I think it was a cleansing in a way. It was a live stream cleansing what was like this awful city that was at the center of everything bad.
I feel like it's time for me to probably go back and revisit it, just based off of this interview and talking about it and revisiting those moments and refreshing those memories, because I think I would get a lot more out of it and a lot of different things out of it at this point. It's interesting how artwork can really change based on where you are in life. Certain themes will speak to you more than others, certain moments will stand out to you more than others. You know, I played the game early on, and so like the more comedic bits really stood out to me. Now I'm older and in a very different place in my life, so probably some of the more mature themes would really resonate with me at this point.
The characters have experienced loss, and they are, like, for better or worse, damaged goods. And then you, the player, by the end of Disc 1, you're a damaged player going into Disc 2 because you've lost a key party member. None of the other characters, if you're like me, you played with her most of the time. In your first group, you had your flower girl doing pretty much all the healing and doing all the work. And then that's you, the player, but the game itself is a damaged, flawed game because of all the things.
And I think that's what's great about Final Fantasy VII and great about video games, especially like the artful ones, is like any good pieces of art, they speak to you differently. And they're constantly changing, and they're constantly getting you to experience them in new ways. And I'm not a type of person to really go back and play a game again, because for me it's the completionist attitude, right? It's like, I did it, I checked it off my list. But sometimes you have to allow yourself the time to go back and really appreciate those important things in your life. And I think that Final Fantasy is probably one of those things that I owe to myself to revisit.
It's hard to talk at length about Final Fantasy VII without sparking a heated debate. Most people can agree that this game was a well-made, high-quality production, at least at launch. But somewhere between now and then, more and more people have jumped up the hype wave more than anything. This is attributed to the game's admittedly confusing story, but let's think about everything so far about Final Fantasy VII, right? It's a game about loss and identity, but not just for Cloud or any other characters in the game. Final Fantasy VII sets out to create a feeling of loss and confusion within yourself too. Most obviously, whether you enjoyed it or not, this can be seen when you lose Aerith or when Cloud is replaced by Tifa and Cid at the head of the party. But what if there's more than that to this game? What if Final Fantasy VII is the video game version of a modern novel, where the structure of the work itself is tied into the theme it's trying to get across? Maybe Final Fantasy VII obscures the truth and leaves a little bit more of the story to be unclear so you can interpret it for yourself. So at the end, when you have total hindsight of the whole experience, you can apply what you felt as you took the journey and give the whole thing some personal meaning. Now, when I picked up Final Fantasy VII, it was during a time where I lost my own mother to dementia when I was very young, and everything this game did at the time struck so well with me. It made so much more sense, and as a kid, I was just a child during the whole thing, and it stuck with me. This extended review has been that for me, and I hope all of you at home got something from it too. This was my journey, and while there was some similarities, it's never going to be the exact same for every single one of us. Gaia feels real, and none of us are going to see every last inch of it. And so, even though I am the completionist, I'm happy to know there's always more out there for me to think about and interpret and see in this game. And for the first time in a long while, I do not want to give this a completionist scale of burn it to complete it, because, you know what, it's up to you guys at home to make the informed decision about it. I hope you all enjoyed our journey so far, but we still have to think about Zach's journey and what the theme of embracing your dreams is truly about. I want to say a very special thank you to Jimmy, to Alex for helping me write this series, to Greg for being so patient and kind with the creation of this whole thing, and most importantly, all of our guests who've been on the show, Aaron, Jesse, Matt, and Sam, and obviously all you guys at home. So, with that in mind, we'll see you guys next week for our in-depth analysis of Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII.